Hello, my friends, and welcome back to another episode of Garhdo Goes Geek. On this episode, we're going to be taking a look at Star Trek Strange New Worlds. Now, obviously, I've previously reviewed Season 1 of this show, but Season 2 was available and concluded earlier this year. I did watch it as it was going, and I thought I'd finally sit down and give my thoughts on it. Spoiler alert, there's a lot to like, and I really enjoyed it. So, settle in and stick around. I'll go through all the episodes and talk about some of the more entertaining things from them. So, anyone who's seen my previous review for Season 1 of Strange New Worlds will know that I was very, very positive about it. I think it's one of the best, if not the best, Star Trek shows out at the moment, and definitely contender for one of the best Star Trek shows overall. I think the first season is probably the best first season that any Star Trek show has ever had. Since the original series, at the very least, because usually most Star Trek shows since the original seem to have taken a while to find their feet. And even then, the original series, as many great episodes as there are in that first season, and however many bad episodes there are later on, it still takes a while before a lot of things sort of slot into place. There's a reason it has 3 pilots. But saying that, Strange New Worlds Season 2, I think manages to capture lightning in a bottle twice. This is a brilliant season in terms of developing, taking everything that had come before, all that groundwork that had been laid across Season 1, for the characters, the main and recurring cast, and their positions within the show, with positions within the crew, within the universe of Star Trek, and just continue to develop them. And just like the first season, it is very episodic. Each episode is doing its own thing, and in fact, and that's even more pronounced in this season, because while in Season 1, each episode was individual and was episodic, for the most part, they were all following very similar, broad sci-fi adventure storytelling. There were a couple that were a bit lighter in tone, and a couple that were a bit darker in tone, and obviously there was there was the episode with the fantasy novel, and things like that. So there were some episodes that were very different, but they were all very much sci-fi stories. This one, that's also true. They are still science fiction stories, but there is a more pronounced tonal shift within these episodes as to what they are all trying to be. A couple of these episodes are very dark, and they're desperately trying to evoke almost like one particular type of storytelling. I've spoken before when I did my franchise retrospective for Star Trek, how Star Trek will try and do pretty much everything. It has comedy episodes, it has action episodes, it has drama episodes, it has thriller episodes, it has everything like that. That's what this series of Strange New Worlds does. Each of these episodes seems to take on a different tone. There's a time travel episode, there's a courtroom episode, there's a very good sort of dramatic episode, there's a sort of fish out of water comedy, there's a mystery, there's a war story, and for the first time in Star Trek, there is a musical, and the musical is fantastic. I'm going to praise the musical. So yeah, this is taking everything that existed before, all that groundwork that was laid, and just expanding on it in the best way. And it with the characters that we love. Like, a lot of people have said over the past couple of years, especially when Orville hit its peak, that Orville was the best Star Trek show out at the minute. Um, but I think Star Trek: Strange New Worlds is the show that, out of all the modern Star Trek shows, is the one that's sort of challenging that. And I love the Orville. Anyone who's listened to my previous episode knows how much I love the Orville, and especially season 2 and season 3, which are just fantastic. Like, Orville New Horizons is pretty much a perfect season of sci-fi storytelling. But and I'm still waiting for that season 4 announcement. The strikes aren't helping. But yes, Strange New Worlds is proving that there's still life in Star Trek. A lot of life in Star Trek to do something new and surprising. And I'm not a huge fan of the idea of prequels. Like, prequels annoy me because there's, as I spoke about in my previous review, where some of these characters are going to end up, and it removes dramatic tension from that. Like I said with the Gorn episode in season 1, 6 of those characters that were involved in that away team appear in the original series, so they have to survive this no matter what peril they're placed in. And there are still elements of that in this series as well, don't get me wrong, but you kind of forget about it while you're watching it because the storytelling here is that good. And the characters that we don't know where they end up are usually involved as well, and that adds to the tension and the drama. So yeah, that's what I want to So yeah, I'm going to go through every episode of season 2. I'm going to look at some of the highlights, some of the low points. Admittedly, there's not as many low points, and just things where it seems to have developed the core cast and the core characters, and where I think some of these things might go. So hopefully you'll join me. But short version, if you enjoyed the previous season of Strange New Worlds, if you liked what I said about it, you can expect a lot more of the same here. This is just everything you liked from season 1, those same character arcs, those same character stories, developing in new ways with some new episodes and some amazing surprises along the way. I'm going to try not to spoil too much, but obviously I will have to discuss like the basic plot of each episode. So yeah, stick around. I think you'll enjoy it. So just as a quick guide to what happened in season 1 and Discovery before that of Strange New Worlds. Strange New Worlds focuses on the crew of the USS Enterprise, the original Enterprise from the original series, however, set about 7 to 8 years before that, before Kirk's adventures on the ship. The ship is currently captained by Christopher Pike, who at some point in the future, in a fate that he is aware of and has toyed with the idea of changing, will end up suffering a severe accident that will leave him confined to a chair that will only be able to communicate via a series of beeps. Obviously, this is quite a dark fate, but something he has decided to accept after seeing that any attempt to change it will lead to the death of his science officer, Spock, the half-human, half-Vulcan. Because Spock has matters of some great galactic import in his future. And so Spock being removed from the timeline and suffering a similar fate to Pike will irreparably damage the galaxy. Spock himself is engaged to his Vulcan bondmate T'Pring. She is a full Vulcan and is working for a government department that hunts sort of rogue emotional Vulcans. The rest of the crew is filled out by some other younger versions of characters from Star Trek: The Original Series, most notably Cadet Uhura, who trained on the USS Enterprise during her cadet training and has now gone on to graduate Starfleet Academy and is now an ensign. So there is also the medical team of Dr. Mbenga and Christine Chappell, a civilian nurse who is working with Starfleet. Chappell has an attraction to Spock, but is obviously very interested in being his friend as well, which is making things quite difficult for them both. Rounding out the crew, there is also First Officer Una Chin Riley. Una Chin Riley was revealed in the, also known as Number One. She was revealed in the first season to be a member of the race called the Illyrians. The Illyrians are a race that practice genetic modification. Now, genetic modification is illegal in the Federation, and as a result of this becoming public, she has been arrested and taken from the Enterprise at the end of season 1. The reason why genetic modification is illegal in the Federation is because several hundred years ago, a warlord, genetically enhanced augment of Khan Noonien-Singh, took over a large portion of the planet and kickstarted both eugenics wars, which then later led to World War III. As a result, genetic engineering is illegal in the Federation. There is a descendant of Khan Noonien-Singh's on board the ship, who is Lan Noonien-Singh. She is the security officer. She grew up in a Gorn prison camp, being abducted by the alien race. The Gorn are a race that are currently experiencing tensions with the Federation in the aftermath of the recent Klingon War. There is also the engineering officer, chief engineer of Lieutenant Hemmer. Hemmer died while dealing with a Gorn attack in a previous episode. He was infected with one of their eggs, so the Gorn were actually due to hatch out of him, which would have killed him. As a result, he decided to sacrifice himself to sort of save his crewmates. This particular action directly impacted Uhura in quite a negative way, who had grown to see Hemmer as a bit of a mentor figure. The final member of the crew, worth discussing at this point, is Erica Ortegas. She is the flight lieutenant of the ship. She's essentially the pilot. There are a couple of other notable additions from the original series, most notably George Samuel Kirk, who is the older brother of James Tiberius Kirk. James T. Kirk appeared at the end of the last season in an alternate timeline. But George is a good friend of Pike's and is assigned to the USS Enterprise. Unlike Kirk, he is a physicist. Sorry, it's going to get confusing. Two Kirks. George is a xenoanthropologist or xenoarchaeologist, I want to say. So he works for the science department on the USS Enterprise. Meanwhile, James Kirk it works on the Farragut, where he is on the command track and is currently assigned as second officer. So yeah, that sort of catches you up to a lot of the main stuff, and we'll go from there. Right, so the first episode of season 2 is called The Broken Circle, and this is probably the episode that I would say is the weakest, but it's not any particular negative on this episode's quality. More just a comment on how much more memorable and how how much better I find the other episodes. Like, it's not that it's a bad episode at all. It really isn't. Very good, in fact. Um, Brings in the Klingons, brings back a lot of the new, a lot of the crew, reintroduces us to everyone, introduces the new engineer who is Pelia. She is a part of a long-lived alien race called the Lathanites. She's played by Carol Kane, who is just sublime. She's not in every episode this season, but I love Carol Kane anytime she appears in pretty much anything. So I was a big fan of her in this. This episode sees the Enterprise get a distress call from Lan, because she's found like a group of Klingons planning a false flag operation to kind of reignite the Federation Klingon War. And this is the first time we've seen the Klingons in this time period since Star Trek Discovery. Now, the Klingons for Discovery did get redesigned, and it was quite contentious. These Klingons look far more similar to the Klingons in sort of the Next Generation era, which means they don't technically match what they looked like in the original series. But to be honest, I don't care. Like, from the moment they introduced the Klingons with the head ridges and the armor in the motion picture in the 70s, I was just like, okay, so that's clearly what they were always meant to look like. We just didn't have the budget to make them look that way in the original series. That's clearly Klingons. That's all I needed. I know they did do like an explanation in Enterprise and explained like, oh, it's to do with the augment virus and the Klingons were experimenting and all that. It doesn't matter. It really doesn't matter. It's I know some people really get hung up on that and like the minutiae of these things. And I do to a certain extent, but there's some things I am more than willing to hand wave away if it's done, if it's clearly not important. Like if it's like clearly a budget limitation. That's why Klingons used to look different. It was only when Deep Space Nine pointed it out that it became a problem that needed to be addressed. But you know, yeah, it's the idea of there being a false flagship, and this episode focuses quite heavily on it takes kind of an ensemble approach, but it does focus on Spock, Lan, and Benga and Chapel, especially because they end up getting captured, and we see them kind of fight their way off in this glorious action scene using like this concoction that they clearly used during the war. Because Klingons are obviously physically stronger than humans, so this concoction allows them to basically fight and defeat Klingons, and it's quite brutal, actually, the fight scenes. But we also get a nice interaction towards the end of the episode where we see Spock kind of bonding with the Klingons over drinks, and kind of finding a neutral ground, because obviously there's multiple factions of Klingons involved here. And like Robert April, the Admiral, he comes in, he reprimands Spock for this, but is like quite grateful that obviously war with the Klingons was avoided. But it's like, we know from Spock's personal timeline, because obviously Strange New Worlds is a prequel to the original series, which then obviously leads into the animated series, the original series films, his roles in Next Generation, the Kelvin timeline films, and so on, that Spock has this destiny ahead of him as a peacemaker. And one of the races that he makes peace with is the Klingon Empire. Like, it's arguable that the peace between the Klingon Empire and the Federation that exists by the time of Next Generation wouldn't exist without the previous contributions of Spock and the others during the events of Star Trek VI, The Undiscovered Country. So the idea here that we see Spock deal with the Klingons and approach them in a way that he actually manages to find peace is quite good. The second episode is where we really start to address something from the previous series, though, and that is Ad Astra per Aspera. There's a few Star Trek titles that have Latin. This is one of them. Pike recruits an Illyrian civil rights attorney called Nira Katul as a defense counsel for Number One. And basically, this episode is Number One's trial. And the prosecution is actually being led by Marie Patel, who is Pike's girlfriend, Captain Patel of the Cayuga. And she was the one who actually arrested Number One at the end of the last series. So there's that tension between her and Pike as well. So it's quite good that we get an actual lawyer in a trial case of Star Trek. Usually when trials happen in Star Trek, the lawyers tend to be the main crew, or a guest star, but the focus is on the crew as the defendant. Like there's Star Trek the original series Court Martial, where it's like I can't remember who's leading the prosecution on that, but Spock and McCoy are witnesses, Kirk is defendant. But I don't remember there being a huge focus on the lawyer character, but it has been a while since I've watched that episode. Whereas in Star Trek The Next Generation, which was the one that really kind of popularized the whole idea of there being like court cases, the most popular ones I can think of are Measure of the Man, where the guest character is the judge, but Picard and Riker are appointed the lawyers for the prosecution and the defense. The Drumhead, where Worf is one of the big investigators for the guest character of Admiral Satie to sit as interrogator and judge. And then Star Trek Voyager, where there's episodes like Death Wish, where the lawyers are Tuvok and Q in that one, with Janeway as the judge, and Author, which I think also features Janeway defending the Doctor. So, the idea of actually bringing in a lawyer character, like someone specially for this, I really like. And the actor playing Nira Katul, I've forgotten her name. I'm just going to look it up. Yetide Badaki. She is really good. She's kind of power dressed. She's a really cool character. She's coming in with a clear purpose, which is that she wants to advance Illyrian society. She has her own role, her own goals. Oh, the actress, that was it. She played Bilquis in American Gods. So was where like one of the things that she became best known for. And yeah, in this she's brilliant. I really like her. The court case goes through the standard twists and turns of a Star Trek trial episode, but it is very good. There's elements of looking at the Prime Directive, looking at whether there's an investigation on how Starfleet learned about Number One. Like Lan is actually worried that it's her own logs, because obviously she did not react very well when she found out the truth about Number One, because of obviously being an ancestor of descendant of Khan. She takes genetically modification quite personally. So she's worried that it's her logs, her personal logs, that we use to sort of out Number One. I'm not going to reveal where it actually comes from because it involves the conclusion of the episode where it's all revealed. But there's a lot of twists and investigation, and it really works, I think, at kind of, addressing Illyrian society and expanding on it. Because the Illyrians have appeared in Star Trek before. They were introduced in an episode of Star Trek Enterprise, but they've never really been developed since. And in this, we have an idea of how Illyrian society exists both inside and outside of the Federation, because obviously Illyrians that do undergo genetic modification can't really exist as part of the Federation, and we actually get to see that and see what that means. And it's very rare in Star Trek, I think, where you actually get to see what life is like outside of the Federation. And it's because obviously the Federation is a great concept and we want to explore that universe. The world of the Federation is it's a post-scarcity, equalitarian, free thinking society where everyone is kind of equal and they're without want, but it's like the we don't really see what's outside of that to sort of contract against it. And if we do, it's usually in the case of antagonists. So the Klingon Empire, the Romulan Empire, maybe things like the Ferengi, or, the Cardassians, the Dominion, that sort of thing. But we do know that there are crime syndicates that operate in Federation space or around Federation space. We know all these things because we have seen elements of it. We've seen rebellions, we've seen colonies out on the edges that can be preyed upon by pirates. All these things have kind of been covered, especially in the last few years. And I quite like seeing outside of the Federation. I think the reason the Federation works as something ideal is if we can see what the absence of it is like. And, the Illyrians aren't as bad as some others, but it does show a definite counterpoint, and I really like it. And I want more of it. Like, I'd be more than happy to see more of Starfleet, more Star Trek without Starfleet, without the Federation, so that we can see things outside it. And I know one other Star Trek series that I'm going to be talking about later this year is like that. So I'm very much looking forward to looking at that one. The third episode, Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow, this is the time travel alternate universe episode. It's kind of obligatory. It's almost as obligatory as a court case episode for Star Trek at this point. A mysterious wounded man appears on the Enterprise, gives a time travel device to La'an before he dies. La'an then finds herself in an alternate timeline where the Enterprise is being captained by James Kirk and Earth is being ravaged by war. Like, it's not the Federation, it's like a united Earth. So the Federation doesn't exist. In fact, I think the ship is under attack by a Vulcan vessel with Spock in command. So, but then from there, La'an and this alternate Kirk end up finding themselves in 2020's Toronto. And that is basically the adventure of the episode. They have to find out what is the point of divergence that has caused this alternate timeline, and how can they sort of resolve it, because both of them have a vested interest in it, because La'an is from one timeline and Jim is from another. And again, I think I commented this with the last time when I reviewed season 1, but the actor Paul Wesley, who's playing Jim Kirk, he's really good. And something I was thinking while I was watching this is, because obviously this is the second time we've seen a young Kirk. Because in the Kelvin timeline films, so Star Trek 2009, Star Trek Into Darkness, and Star Trek Beyond, the reboot films with Chris Pine. Chris Pine was playing Captain Kirk in those. And he was younger than William Shatner's version of the character. But not only was he younger, he was a very different person. Like, he'd grown up without his father. He seemed more estranged from his brother Sam. He was much more rebellious, much more angry. He wasn't an officer until almost the last minute, and he's then suddenly thrust into the role of captain, because Star Trek 2009 happens very quickly and is very pulpy and very action adventure. It's part of the reason why I love it. It works really well for what it is. This Jim Kirk, though, and the main timeline version that we'll see later on in the series, this is a Kirk that grew up with his father. And so as a result, he's been a Starfleet officer for some time. He's much more measured. And while I think it's less the case in this episode, because it is still a different version of Kirk, this one sort of straddles the line a bit closer to the Chris Pine portrayal. But in the previous season, Memento Mori, plus in his appearances later on in this season, because this isn't the only episode that Paul Wesley will appear as Jim in this. Paul Wesley's portrayal of Kirk feels like I can see this character growing into William Shatner's portrayal of Kirk. But I can't say that for Chris Pine. And that's because, obviously, one, Chris Pine is a very different iteration of the character. But, this version is meant to be the same version of Kirk that we see in the original series. And so, when I'm watching this, I can actually see it. I can be like, yeah, I can see, because timeline-wise, Strange New Worlds is taking place at roughly the same time as those Kelvin timeline movies. About 7 to 8 years before the original series. And yeah, I'm watching it and I'm going, yeah, I could see this being Kirk. Not yet, in a couple of years, because he's still only a lieutenant. But yeah, in a few years, I could see this being the Jim Kirk that we know and love, which is good. And I think that's how prequels should work. You want it to be like the Kelvin movies did an alternate timeline quite clearly. It was very clearly an alternate timeline. That's why the prequel aspect of it worked and why everyone was recast. This is a more elaborate prequel, so it has to have that sort of continuity, and I think it does. This episode also actually introduces a very interesting wrinkle in time travel for Star Trek. And I don't want to spoil too much, but I will say it does involve Khan and the eugenics wars. Because it's the idea that, because obviously the eugenics wars are different in this timeline, because Jim Kirk doesn't recognize Lan's surname, Noonien-Singh, whereas every other Starfleet officer in her timeline does. So clearly something's different there. And we find out, basically, because by the 2020s, the eugenics war should have already happened. Like, in the original timeline, they were supposed to happen in the 90s. And, slight spoilers for this episode, but I'm not going to spoil most of the plot of this episode, because this is sort of the end revelation, but this is an episode where the journey is more important than the destination, in terms of the development for the characters. In the finale of this episode, it's revealed that due to time travel shenanigans in Star Trek, history alters itself. It's like throwing rocks in a pond, and it creates ripples that sort of echo downstream. So because time keeps being meddled with, in throughout Star Trek history, we've seen things like The Voyage Home, Star Trek First Contact, episodes like Time's Arrow, Star Trek Enterprise with its whole temporal Cold War, Deep Space Nine's Past Tense, Future Voyager's Future Imperfect. We've seen all of these time travel episodes and what they've done is they've altered historical events and nudged the timeline. So that's why they're in 2020's Toronto and the eugenics wars haven't happened. And this is why also earlier on in Strange New Worlds, the eugenics wars were kind of mentioned as coming off of the back of, this is in season 1, I mentioned it there, how those eugenics wars were mentioned as happening sort of off the back of things like the January 6th, 2020 Capitol insurrection, and sort of, the unrest that led to America's Civil War II, which then led to the eugenics wars, which then directly led to World War III. So it's like all of this change to the timeline is sort of shifting things down. So now the eugenics wars is like part of World War III. The thing I like about this is it means that whichever way you want to watch Star Trek, it works. And now, if there is something that doesn't make sense or contradicts with a previous episode, there's a headcanon for it. Because it's like, okay, well, the eugenics wars clearly didn't take place in the 90s. You know, in the 60s, when the episode Space Seed was written that introduced Khan Noonien-Singh, it was easy to kind of say, well, you know, in 30, 40 years, that could happen. You know, we could, you know, we're looking at genetics and genetic modification, genetic engineering. Where could we be in 30 years? Oh, maybe we might have created Superman and he might have tried to take over the world. That's an interesting concept for the 60s sci-fi. 60s sci-fi is so optimistic and I love it. Um, makes me wonder what the hell happened to the world. Oh, right, capitalism. Um, but anyway, you know, that makes sense from from the 60s, that in 30 years we could have had the eugenics wars. Then obviously by the time we get to the Next Generation era, we're living that history, and it's like, well, these things clearly aren't happening. So then when Star Trek Voyager does a time travel episode to the mid 90s, you know, to the modern day at the time that it was being filmed, um everyone's like, well, where's the effects of the eugenics wars? Where's Khan? And then they have to headcanon it and say, oh, well, clearly it didn't affect Los Angeles. We only see Los Angeles. Maybe Khan, you know, Khan apparently conquered a quarter of the world. And it's like, well, okay, he could have conquered, you know, the Middle East, Asia, North Africa, and it wouldn't have impacted America. And it's like, okay, yeah, that's fair enough. You know, Khan was clearly supposed to be Indian or you know, that sort of Indian subcontinent heritage. So yeah, fine, kind of. But now this episode is like, well, no, it's the 2020s and the eugenics wars haven't happened yet. They keep shifting. Everything keeps shifting and changing because of meddling in the past due to time agents. And it's like, oh. And more importantly, this means that you can now watch Star Trek in any order you like. You could watch Star Trek in a chronological order, in which case you would start with something like Star Trek Discovery and Star Trek Strange New Worlds, and then go into the original series. Or, you know, and then from there into like the Next Generation, Deep Space Nine, Voyager, etc. In fact, no, you'd start with Star Trek Enterprise. Or forget all that and watch it in the order it was released. You can watch the original series, then go to Next Generation, and so on until you get to the modern day stuff with Strange New Worlds and Picard and Discovery. That's a really clever way of doing it, I think. They've kind of given themselves a nice backdoor. I like it. And then episode 4, Among the Lotus Eaters. This one is a very interesting one. It involves Pike, Lan, and Mbenga being down to a planet where there may have been some historical contamination, and it's a planet that Pike visited several years ago, and the mission was unsuccessful. But it's revealed, like, while they're there, that people start losing their minds, they start losing their memories. And it starts happening, first of all, to the landing party, and then it gradually starts happening to the people on the ship. And one of the things this episode does as well is it also tries to focus more on a character who has been relatively underdeveloped by this point, which is Erica Ortegas. And, you know, it's just trying to give her a bit more of a focus. You know, it's still very much focusing on everyone else, but she is more of a narrative point of focus on the ship. So whenever we come up to the Enterprise in this, Erica's the one we focus on. Like, Erica was supposed to be part of the landing party, but couldn't be. And it's a great episode. I really like the conclusion to it. I like a lot of the stuff that it does. There's a nice little mystery element, like what the heck is going on, and then when you find out what's going on and how to solve it, it works quite well. I like it. Probably not one of the best episodes, but you know, if I was to rank all 10, this would be towards the lower end. But what it does very well. And I also like the idea of how they've built the society on the planet. Like, this is a society on this planet that loses a lot of their short-term memories. Their long-term memories remain. Like, they can recognize people. They recognize well, no. Or was it the other way around? Yeah, it was the long-term memories disappear, but their short-term memories remain. So they can have skills from, their life, but they're unsure how they've got them. So, like, for example, the away team end up enslaved and get put to work. And in Benga, because he's been able to fight, doesn't realize that he's a doctor. But then, of course, his doctor training comes out later on. They sort of forget faces. They forget which house is theirs. So they have to use, like, pictograms to sort of remember things. It's really quite clever. It's a good bit of world building that shows that, they actually put some real thought into this. And yeah, I think it works quite well. Yeah, some good parts, some good twists, and the actual resolution of the episode with Ortegas, she's brilliant. And I really hope we get more episodes with her as a focus, because this is like the first one we've gotten, and it's like the 14th episode overall. Part of that is the how much of a restricted season count Strange New Worlds has had. And in fact, one of the producers did actually speak out about this and said, between COVID and strikes and other stuff, it's taken them like 4 years to make 2 seasons. And so he's really hoping that by the time, if not the 3rd season, because I think the 3rd season is still only confirmed for another 10 episodes, but hopefully by the time we get to a 4th season, the episode count will be bumped up. And we know that Paramount is going to stop making Discovery soon. Like, Discovery season 5 is going to be its last. And up until now, Discovery has had a higher episode count. So Discovery has had an episode count of about 16 episodes a season, whereas Strange New Worlds is on 10. And I'm hoping that if Discovery comes to an end, some of that extra budget and allowance will go from Discovery to Strange New Worlds, especially with Picard also ending. I know there is talk about like the Star Trek Legacy spin-off and things like that, with whatever's going on with Prodigy as well is also affecting the budgets. But it's like Strange New Worlds was actually renewed really early. Like, these episodes didn't start coming out until June. It was renewed in March, so it was renewed ahead of the debut of the 2nd season for season 3. So season 3 we already know is coming. Can't film at the minute because of the strikes, obviously, but it's still planned to be out by sort of 2024. Sort of end of 2024, hopefully. So, fingers crossed. I'm looking forward to it whenever it does come out. Obviously, because I really like the show. But yeah, they need more time to do. I mean, each of these episodes is packed, and I think another reason why these episodes work so well and are as packed as they are, and this episode was the one where I realized this actually, is because there's no commercial breaks. It's not an hour long that has to be split into like 4 separate 15-minute parts, each with like their own cliffhanger or tease, because it's a streaming show. And so it can just flow narratively a lot better from one point to the next. And it means that you can have lots of twists and turns in the story. They don't have to be perfectly timed and telegraphed for, the advert break so that you're guaranteed to come back for the next section. And I think that's one reason why they're able to put so much in these episodes, because these are like an hour long without the advert breaks, because they're designed for streaming. And yeah, they work really well for it. Really, really well. There's a couple of points here where I'm like, oh, that would have been a commercial break. And it's like, if every part I thought that for in this episode had been a commercial break, there would have been about 10 commercial breaks in this episode. Episode 5 is a comedy. There's no other real way to describe it. It's a comedy. There's some other stuff going on as well, like some quite emotional stuff, but it's a comedy. There's a lot of laugh out loud moments, and it makes me laugh because I think it's in a similar place to the Spock Amok episode. in terms of its overall placement in the season. Like Spock Amok was season 1, episode 5, and it focuses on Spock and Christine. Charades is episode 5 of season 2 and focuses on Spock and Christine. And it works very well. And just like in Spock Amok, T'Pring is involved. There is not necessarily a body swap in the same way that Spock Amok was, but there's definitely some changes going on. And, it focuses on the, Spock and T'Pring's relationship and the conflicted and quite challenging feelings that Christine has for Spock, while also trying to support him and be friendly with him. And I think it works so well. Essentially, the Enterprise encounters a higher dimensional race, and Spock and Chapel are in a shuttle, and they nearly get killed while encountering them. When they do, this race heals Chapel, but they accidentally turn Spock full human. The problem is Spock is preparing for a engagement ritual with his fiancée T'Pring and her parents. And her parents, especially her mother, is quite bigoted towards humans. And so Spock, now human, now dealing with a lot of emotions, has to kind of seek help from his mother, Amanda, played by Mia Kirshner, returning to the role from her appearances in Star Trek Discovery. She has to come on board and help. And I like that it's Amanda and not Amanda and Sarek. Like, it's still very clear that there's an issue between Spock and Sarek. And obviously that will then go on to inform their eventual reconciling in Journey to Babel. So while it's a shame that we won't see any more of Sarek, because I like the actor who was playing him in Discovery, and I liked his performance as the character, it makes complete sense, and it does fit narratively. It's that whole continuity thing. But yeah, more of Amanda. I'm more than happy to see more of Amanda. I will say, though, I don't think Mia Kirshner is that much older than Ethan Peck. So Amanda does not look old enough to be Spock's mother. But yeah, so Amanda being very aware of this ritual, having gone through it herself, to marry Sarek, she's aware of this ritual and she comes aboard the Enterprise, she wants to help Spock prepare. Spock doesn't tell T'Pring about his condition, though, because he doesn't want to worry her. So he was relying on the crew to help him disguise himself and to try and stall the ritual. And, like, Pike tries to contact these other dimensional aliens, and they basically put him in a queue. They play like hold music and everything, which is hilarious. And yeah, it's just the whole, not quite fish out of water, but like this really kind of awkward comedy. But at the same time, there is some really good moments in it. Like, it's not a cringe comedy. It's like there's some real genuine emotion here. Chapel is so obsessed with trying to return Spock to normal. And like, she's the driving force behind it. And she actually like fully reveals her feelings for him to the aliens as like a plan to do it. And then there's Spock and Amanda having to deal with the bigotry from T'Pring's mother. But yeah, it's very good. It's very good. It's very funny. And like I said, it's got some real emotional beats in it as well. But I'm going to have to kind of spoil one element of it to talk about some future episodes, which is that because Spock hid his condition from T'Pring, she's quite offended that he can't trust her, and she asks to take a break from their relationship. And in the aftermath of this, Spock confesses to Chapel that he also has feelings for her, and they end up kissing. And so what begins is a sort of relationship between the two of them, which becomes an ongoing plot thread. And this sort of exemplifies, I think, what Strange New Worlds does well, which is that we have these character arcs and character relationships that keep evolving and changing through the episodes, but the actual plots are very episodic. And to me, I think it's one of Strange New Worlds' biggest strengths. It's something that I've been hoping that more Star Trek series would do since Star Trek Deep Space Nine. Um, and it's happened quite rarely. Um, quite often we'll get the episodic stories, but not the ongoing character development, or, we'll get, you know, some ongoing character development, but it comes along with like a more serialized story, like for example in Discovery or Picard. Whereas Strange New Worlds is like, no, this is an episodic Star Trek. Each episode is a new adventure and something new and brings something new to the table. And this is countered quite well in the next episode, which is Lost in Translation, which gets far more serious again. Like Charades was funny. Um, Among the Lotus Eaters was quite serious. Charades was quite funny. Um, and then Lost in Translation gets a bit more serious again. This one focuses on Uhura, and she starts seeing hallucinations while the Enterprise and the Farragut are teamed up. And obviously, with the Farragut being involved, Kirk's involved because he's assigned to the Farragut. And this episode, I think, is really good. Celia Rose Gooding, who plays Uhura, they are a fantastic actor. They're doing a brilliant role, a brilliant job in the role. And Uhura was always this very present character in TOS. Like, I saw it revealed recently. Like, she's in every episode of the original series, bar like 11. And admittedly, she doesn't get much actual character development herself until like the animated series. But Nichelle Nichols was really trying with that role. And I think it's quite important that she was there. So seeing more of Uhura's development is just, if anything, it's just accentuating the character that was already there. And I'm all for that because I like Uhura as a character and I want her to be further developed. I should have said as well, the first episode of the season as well was also dedicated to Nichelle Nichols. It was the first episode that aired after she passed away. And so it was actually dedicated to her, which I thought was quite sweet. Yeah, it was one of a few Star Trek dedications that's brought a tear to my eye. The other one was Star Trek Beyond with its little for Anton in the end credits. That one really gets to me. But yeah, Uhura and one of the other members of the crew on the Farragut are suffering from like illusions and hallucinations and strange noises. And in Uhura's case, she's seeing the deaths of her parents, and she's also seeing Hema. And this is all happening while the Enterprise and the Farragut are trying to repair a deuterium refinery. And like I said, we get Kirk involved on this. Kirk shows quite quickly why he's such a good character. He instantly, like, we first see him meet with Uhura, and like he doesn't try and hit on her like the Chris Pine version did in the 2009 movie. He just wants to talk, and he's one of the first people to believe her when she says what she's going through, and he wants to investigate and help. Doesn't want her to ignore anything, and he works with both Uhura and his brother Sam to sort of help her understand what's going on. And it turns out that this refinery that they're trying to turn on is actually killing these microscopic aliens, and this is their way of trying to communicate. It's really clever. Really, really clever. And I think the character stuff here is some of the best. And this is where we get some of the the first real interactions between Kirk and some of the characters he would know later on. Like, we see him introduced to Spock. We see him working with Uhura, so it explains their relationship and why he thinks so highly of her. We see him working with Pike as well. So yeah, really good episode. Great one for Kirk, and a really great one for Uhura. And it was just lovely to see Bruce Horak come back as Hemmer. Because yeah, I really liked Hemmer, and I thought Bruce Horak was a great actor. So in the role, so it'd be nice to see him come back more. Admittedly, the character is dead, but I'm sure there's other way. This isn't the only time he comes back as Hemmer in this season, and it's usually done through like video recordings and other things. So there's always a way, the alternate timelines, all sorts of things like that going on in Star Trek. There's so many possibilities. It could happen again. Episode 7, though. I'm just going to gush about this episode for a bit. This is quite possibly one of my favorite episodes of Star Trek ever, in terms of it just being complete joy to watch. Like, it's not trying to be political, it's not trying to make a point, it's not trying to be poignant, it's not trying to be emotional. This episode is purely designed to be fun. And it is called Those Old Scientists. It is directed by Jonathan Frakes, the actor who played Commander Riker in the original Star Trek The Next Generation, and went on to direct episodes not just of that series, but also a couple of the films and episodes of pretty much every Star Trek series ever since. And it is a crossover between the animated series Star Trek Lower Decks and Star Trek Strange New Worlds. And I love it. There are usually my favorite episodes of Star Trek are episodes that are more action focused or more poignant in one way or another. Those are the episodes that I tend to gravitate towards. Those are the episodes I tend to rewatch. It's not often that Star Trek does a really good comedy episode. And it's not often that I put an episode on to rewatch it just because it brings a smile to my face. Star Trek is about more than bringing a smile to your face. Star Trek has always been about saying something. Star Trek is progressive and it's optimistic and lighthearted a lot of the time. But, it's this progressive show. It's a political show. It's diverse show. And, but it's also this pulpy science fiction action adventure show. But this is just a comedy show. And it even starts animated. It starts with the animated styles of Star Trek Lower Decks. And in fact, the opening credits are animated in the same way as the Lower Decks ones are, with similar sort of callbacks to Lower Decks. And I love it. Basically, due to time travel shenanigans, Ensign Boimler and eventually Ensign Mariner both end up in the timeline of Strange New Worlds. So they're not going back like 120 years. And then, of course, the whole thing is, right, how do we get them back? And I think Star Trek Lower Decks is one of those. I know many people who like it, and I know some diehard Trekkies that absolutely hate it. For a multitude of reasons. Some of them because they don't think it's funny, some of them because they think it's very out of character, like the characters in it are acting more like fans of Star Trek rather than people who are in Star Trek is one complaint I've heard from a very popular YouTuber, which I kind of see where he's coming from. I don't necessarily agree, but I do see where he's coming from. And obviously it's designed to be a comedy, and your mileage varies with comedy based on what you find funny. And obviously in this one, which is quite a self-referential comedy on Star Trek as a whole, like it pokes holes in Star Trek. There's a lot of references and callbacks to other episodes that are used to create the jokes. Um, and a lot of those will work depending on if you've seen those relevant episodes, if you're aware of those things of Star Trek. If you're not, it becomes harder. But I really enjoy it. And, I've spoken before about this when I've reviewed some of the episodes of season 2 as it was airing. And I am going to do a more in depth kind of review on Lower Decks in general when season 4 concludes, because, then I can kind of review all 4 seasons at once. But there's a lot going on in Lower Decks. It's not just an out and out comedy. There are some quite good moments, and Boimler is my favorite iteration. He's one of my favorite Star Trek characters ever. He has some great moments. There's a speech he makes in season 2 which kind of exemplifies what Star Trek should be. How it should just be not just the action and the adventure, but also, things like Riker playing the trombone are just as Star Trek as a big space battle in Deep Space Nine. Scenes like Cisco cooking for the crew, scenes like, Tom Paris playing Captain Proton in the holodeck. It's all Star Trek. And you have to take the slower stuff with the good stuff, and that's, Boimler's great. I love him. He's very optimistic. And he's played brilliantly by Jack Quaid, who obviously voices him in the animated show. I think it's very clear that the actors they've chosen for the main 4 in Lower Decks have been chosen for those roles, and the characters have been designed around them so that they can eventually make the transition into live action. And that's what we get here. We get Boimler and Mariner in live action, and it's great. Unfortunately, we don't get Tendi and Rutherford. We kind of get a hint of it, but it doesn't happen, unfortunately. And we do also get an animated version of all of the Strange New Worlds crew at the end. But there's all sorts of great moments here. Like, Boimler's trying not to contaminate the timeline and is just really bad at it because it's Boimler. And he's just so excited. Mariner comes back. She ends up interacting with Uhura. It's revealed that Boimler has a poster of number 1, and number 1 gets a bit weirded out by it. Like, what sort of poster have you got? Like a pinup or what? It's very clever. And then there's other stuff going on. There's Orions, pirates, and time travel. It's just fun. I really enjoyed it. And there's also some quite nice moments. There's some interesting discussions with Pike. There's a really nice revelation with Pike, actually, that happens because of Boimler. Because obviously Pike is aware of his own future and sort of discusses it with Boimler. But yeah. Yeah, I enjoyed this episode, and it was a lot of fun. A lot of fun. I think this episode works really well as an introduction, not just to Strange New Worlds, but also to Lower Decks. Like, if you have only watched one of those shows and you were kind of curious, like, this is a great idea. Like, crossing the 2 shows over. Like, if you're only into Lower Decks and you watch this episode, and then you're like, oh, these characters, they're on the Enterprise. Oh, that's pretty cool. It'll make you want to watch more of Strange New Worlds, hopefully. And if you watch in Strange New Worlds and you haven't watched Lower Decks because it's like, oh, what, the little cartoon one? No, I'm not interested in that. And then you watch this episode and you're like, oh, okay, it's this funny normally. Okay, yeah, I might give it a look. I think it works really well. And I'm hoping, like, it's the first time I think we've had a direct crossover like this in Star Trek. Like, we've had other episodes where characters from one series have appeared on another, like in the 90s where we had Deep Space Nine, Next Generation, and Voyager sort of overlapping, there were some episodes and some plot lines and some characters that did cross over. Like there was an episode of TNG that guest starred Bashir because the Enterprise was at Deep Space Nine. There was an episode of TNG where Riker got in touch with Quark for information. There was an episode of Deep Space Nine where the Duras sisters came on board. Admittedly, they weren't main characters; they were like recurring villains, but still. And obviously, then there's the less direct crossovers, like when Spock and Scotty appeared in TNG. But there's nothing quite as direct as this. Like, this is a direct connection, and it uses elements of both shows, like with the animation and music cues and costuming. It's a full direct crossover. Like when this, one of the YouTubers I follow, Jessie Earl, she suggested that, you know, a crossover between the two could work and have it be like a secret. Like have like you're watching an episode of Strange New Worlds and then all of a sudden there's you just see Boimler and Mariner in the background, and then you have to wait for like a Lower Decks episode later that year to find out what they were doing there. And then you see the episode doing them in the time travel story and sort of explaining things from their perspective, sort of like Trials and Tribulations from Deep Space Nine, where it's like they're in the background of the Strange New Worlds episode, trying not to interfere with history. But this was a much more direct crossover, and I really think it worked. So yeah, it's one of those where, you know, sometimes what you think you want, and that, you know, you think you want something and then you get it and it's better than you could have imagined. Like when I saw Jessie Earl's post, that was how I envisioned a crossover between the two. Then it was announced that it was coming, and I was like, okay, they'll probably do it like, you know, something in the background, but we'll probably be in see the two characters. But no, it's a direct. This is an overt crossover. We have Beckett and Mariner interacting with the crew of the Enterprise, and vice versa. It's brilliant. It really works. Really, very much enjoyed this episode. Um, the episode that follows it, though, is much more serious, which is Under the Cloak of War. Under the Cloak of War, I've seen someone describe it as like the Deep Space Nine episode of Strange New Worlds, in that it's very dark and it uses a lot of non-linear storytelling, because it flashes back to the Klingon Federation War. Because we're introduced to a Klingon general who defected to the Federation and is said to have killed his own officers when he learns that they were ordering attacks on civilians, which is obviously something that Klingons would see as dishonorable. But you know, he's on the Enterprise. I think the Enterprise is taking him somewhere, and they've been instructed to offer him like every courtesy, which means they go and have a dinner with him. But obviously, some of the officers who actually fought in the Klingon War, including Ortegas, Mbenga, and Chapel, are very, very uncomfortable with the fact he's there. And it turns out that the planet that he fought on, the planet where these attacks on civilians happened, Mbenga and Chapel served on a field hospital there. And, you know, we see flashbacks to that. We see them on the front lines dealing with all that. And we see the trauma that it's caused them, especially Mbenga. This is an episode that focuses very much on Mbenga. And again, I think it was episode 8, Uridian Kingdom? Elysian Kingdom? I've forgotten the name of the episode. But yeah, episode 8 of season 1 was the episode that focused on Mbenga as well. And yeah, I think this episode does a really brilliant job. There's a lot of shades of grey to it, and it reminds me of some of the best episodes of Deep Space Nine and The Next Generation. I'm specifically thinking of episodes like Reunion, Wrong's Darker, no, not Wrong's Darker Than Death and the Night, Darkness and the Light, Duet in some aspects. There's some real dark twists in it. So yeah, one of the best ones, but one that I think might be kind of hard. Excuse me, kind of hard to watch in isolation because it does rely on a lot of knowledge of kind of who these characters are, and I think it also echoes quite well with the first episode of the season, because you've already got that hint of the things that Christine and Mbenga went through from that previous episode, um, and how much it's affected them. Like, it was sort of elaborated in that episode how much it's affected Mbenga, everything that he's gone through. So yeah, there's that aspect as well. It's very good though. I do enjoy it. But it's one that I think its placement in the series works perfectly, in terms of it being, it's surrounded by two episodes that are much lighter in tone, which are Those Old Scientists, and then the following episode, which is Subspace Rhapsody, the musical episode. And I think if it had come, for example, say after Lost in Translation, we would have had two quite dark episodes and then two quite funny episodes in a row. So I think we do need that break to sort of show the yin and yang of the show, essentially. But it does mean, like I said, with the other two episodes being so good and so memorable for completely different reasons, it does kind of overshadow this episode in a way, which is a shame because, like I said, I think it's one of the stronger ones this season in terms of how it's filmed, how it's shot, how it's been edited, how it's been put together. It's definitely one of the best. So now we come to episode 9, Subspace Rhapsody. This is an episode which I think seems to have divided a lot of people. And I think a large part of why it seems to have divided people is that people are arguing that it's not Star Trek because it's a musical episode. And, it's Star Trek's first musical episode. Like, Star Trek has been on the air for coming up to 60 years now. It's 57 years this year, I think. 56 years this year. So Star Trek has never had a musical episode. But that doesn't mean that it can't be something that they do. You just have to find a reason for the music, because musicals fall into two categories. You have like diegetic musicals and non-diegetic musicals. Diegetic musicals are where, let me get this right, I think diegetic is the musical is coming from the story. So it's like something that is diegetic, like diegetic music, is occurring within the context of the story and the characters can hear it. So an example of, and sometimes this can vary even within the musical. Like, some musicals will have some songs that are diegetic and some that aren't. Now, I'm not the most well versed on musicals. I probably should have asked Tallulah to come and help me with this one. But like, for example, a lot of the old MGM musicals aren't necessarily diegetic. When the characters just openly start singing to each other, it's like it's being communicated to the audience in the medium of song, but in most cases within the actual production itself, it's not musical between the two characters. Sometimes it is, though. I'm trying to think of some really good examples. Like something like Moulin Rouge has performances as part of its music. Like, the characters are actually performing songs. So those are examples of diegetic songs. They are, the characters are openly singing them because they're performance pieces. But then you get other examples of non-diegetic music where the characters, for example, are singing their inner thoughts, which is being used in the same way as like a theatre soliloquy, where the character is exposing their innermost thoughts to the audience. It's just that in a musical, rather than it being spoken, it takes the place of the song. Subspace Rhapsody uses the music entirely diegetically, by which I mean that it makes everything that's happening in the episode take place within the episode, and every character is aware of it and every character can hear it. And that is because they took their inspiration from one very, very famous musical episode, which is the Buffy the Vampire episode Once More with Feeling. Now, I've mentioned in previous episodes, I've been watching my way through Buffy and Angel with Zulu. We're really enjoying it. We have taken a bit of a break at the minute so we can watch Good Omens and a few other things. But when we conclude them, we will probably be doing a review on that whole sort of Buffy Angel verse. Once More with Feeling, I think we both agree was one of the best episodes. A demon makes the characters sing. And so a lot of ongoing plot threads kind of come to a conclusion because the characters find themselves singing their inner thoughts in standard musical fashion, but they're singing them directly to each other. And so it's done diegetically. The characters are aware of what they're singing. And it becomes important and plays a role in that episode especially, but then also for the rest of that season. I think it takes place during season 6 of Buffy the Vampire Slayer. And it has a really great soundtrack. It's a really good musical, and it works really well. Subspace Rhapsody is the same, and I think if they were aiming for Once More with Feeling as their sort of benchmark, their target, I think they definitely hit it. It's in a similar way to Once More with Feeling. This is a smart, very thoughtful episode that wears its heart on its sleeve. It's exploring these characters' emotions and their abilities in songs that feel like they've been built around the actors. Like the actors are all doing their own singing, as far as I can tell. And, they've actually said that they sort of wrote songs based on how well the actors could sing them. If one of those, that actor can't hit that note, okay, well, we'll change it and we'll adjust it. And obviously this episode does bring a lot of the ongoing character arcs that have been going on this season to a conclusion. Like, for example, the whole Spock and Christine relationship, which Boimler actually comments on in the episode Those Old Scientists. That is sorts of comes to a conclusion here because of things that are going on. Because of the whole musical, because the characters are singing their feelings to each other. And it works so well. And this episode does in parts focus on Uhura again, which is I'm absolutely fine with that. Like I said, the actor playing Uhura, they are fantastic. And obviously it was clearly inspired by Spock and Uhura singing in harmony together in Children of the Comet, which I think worked really well as well. But yeah, it's a good episode. I don't want to spoil too much of it because, like I said, it's exploring ongoing character arcs. It does feature Paul Wesley coming back as Kirk. But yeah, the songs are exploring character arcs that have been ongoing throughout the series with both the main cast and the supporting cast, the recurring characters. So people like Jim Kirk, people like Captain Patel are involved and are singing in this as well. So yeah, I'll just quickly I think the best way to review this is to give my opinions of the songs themselves, rather than divulge any sort of plot beats, because I really think this is an episode that stands very, very well on its own. There is a reason why they're singing, and it's it's caused by like sci-fi nonsense, um, but it works quite well. I like it. But yeah, we also get like a sung version of the main title, um, which is really good. I think it's all done a cappella style. It's really good. Um, the actual songs themselves, though. Okay, so let's cover that. That's how I'm going to review this episode. Is I'm going to review the music. Um, the first song, apart from the title, is called "Status Report," and I think actually takes place pre-credits. And this one features the entire cast singing their lines. And for a couple of the characters, they only sing in these group numbers. Like Mbenga only sings in the two group numbers, Status Report and We Are One, which is the finale song for the episode. Um, but yeah, Status Report is very good, and sort of introduces us to the concept. Features Paul Wesley as well, features Carol Kane as well. Um, yeah, I like this one. Works really, really well. And is just a great introduction to the sort of like, well, what's going on here? This is all very confusing. And the lyrics do reflect that. And so it kind of sets the tone for what's going on. Um, Connect to Your Truth is the second song. Um, this is an interaction between Number One and Jim Kirk. Jim Kirk has come onto the Enterprise because he is being promoted to First Officer of the Farragut. So he is doing sort of training on the Enterprise under Number One. Um, and, Number One mentions her own training and things like that. And Connect to Your Truth is essentially her giving him advice and them interacting and things like that. It's pretty good. The dance sequence that goes along with it, Rebecca Romaine moves a bit awkwardly. I'm not sure if she's just not that skilled of a dancer. But everyone's giving it their best and they're all clearly having a great time, so I don't care. It's what like a nitpick you could make on this episode. That's it. Um their dance, their interaction is sort of viewed by Lan, and obviously Lan has her own connection to Kirk as a result of Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow, and so we get How Would That Feel, which is her kind of solo, and it's very much a power ballad, very emotional. Christina Jong does a brilliant job. Like her vocal range for that song is so impressive. It's really, really good. Like they lucked out because pretty much every one of these actors can sing. And yeah, it's a solo and it's a very emotional solo and one of the longest songs in the episode actually. Because some songs are quite short, like Connect to Your Truth is less than 2 minutes. This one's about 4.5. Um, but yeah, very good song. Has some great moments, really kind of elaborating a lot of the things that Lana's been going through this season, a lot of the things that she's been thinking, and sort of exploring who she is as a character in it's very much a musical soliloquy. I'm sure there's a better term for that, but I don't know what it is. Um, Private Conversation is probably the funniest song in the episode, just in terms of how it takes place in the show. Because it's a view screen conversation between Pike and Patel on the bridge, hence the term private conversation, because they start openly singing in front of everyone. Only a short one, about 1.5 minutes, but quite funny, especially when you see it in the context of the episode, because the things that Anson Mount is doing with his face as Pike when he realizes what is going on make it just perfect. Absolutely perfect. Um The sixth song, sorry, the next song, Keeping Secrets, I think it's like the fifth song in the episode, unless you count the opening titles. So, because I'm looking at the album list. Um, Keeping Secrets, this is a solo by Rebecca Main. She is a talented singer. Um, it works quite well in the episode. They give it kind of a very music video style vibe. Um, but yeah, I think it I think it works really well. I like it. Um, it's one of the longer ones. It's probably my least favorite overall. Like if I was to go back and listen to these on Spotify, which I have done, this is probably my least favorite overall of all the songs in this episode. But it is still pretty good. The next one, though, this is one of the big bombastic ones, and this is the one that brings um, the sort of Spock and Christine stuff to a conclusion. It's called "I'm Ready," and Christine takes the lead in it, but there's also support from Uhura, um, Dan Jeanette as Sam Kirk, and Melissa Navia as Erica Ortegas. It's really good. It's Jess Bush has this amazingly rich, very modern voice. Um, it's kind of it's a really pleasant voice to listen to. Um, when she's singing, and the song is great. Like it's really fun and lively. Um, my biggest criticism about the song "I'm Ready" is that it's too short. It's only 2.5 minutes long. It's far too short. It's really good. It should have gone on for like another minute. But hey, um, it does get echoed in the following song, which is "I'm the X." So I'm the and then the letter X, like almost like the X Factor. And it's sung by Ethan Peck, and this is again another bit slower. It echoes some of the musical themes of I'm Ready, but with a key change. This is a more minor key rather than a major key, and it's sort of the counterpoint to the other one. Like I'm Ready is Chapel's piece of what's happening and where everything's going. I'm the X is Spock's. The penultimate song is "Keep Us Connected." This is solo by Celia Rose Gooding as Uhura. It is one of the longest in the episode. It's 4.5 minutes, so it's just a few seconds longer than "How Would That Feel." It's fantastic. Like Celia Rose Gooding has an amazing voice. Like they have a background on Broadway, um, so obviously they have an amazing voice. And yeah, this one's just captivating to listen to. And it's the point in the episode where Uhura is kind of working everything out, and she's um analyzing what to do with things, and how to sort of resolve the conflict, because obviously everything's getting more het up, and by this point Klingons are involved as well. The Klingon captain is also played by Bruce Horak, um, returning. So the actor who plays Hemmer, he's returning. He plays the Klingon captain Garkog. Um, so yeah, there's a lot of elements at play by this point in the episode. But yeah, "Keep Us Connected" is a very kind of introspective song for Uhura, but has this rousing chorus, this big finish, um, and kind of solidifies the end plot of the episode and kind of brings things to a conclusion. And then the final song is "We Are One." And this is the big finale. Like, literally, that's how it's defined in the episode. It is a finale. It's a big musical. Bring everyone together, do a full ensemble, full song and dance number. And, like, when I say full song and dance number, I'm talking like this is like Oliver the musical on the Enterprise. Massive performances, all the crew doing synchronized dancing up and down the halls, all the crew on the bridge. It's fantastic. Even the ships. By this point, there's 3 Klingon ships arrived. The Enterprise and the Klingon ships dance in space. It's phenomenal. there's even a bit where it cuts to the view screen of the Klingon ship and the Klingons start singing, and it's phenomenal. It's like one of the best parts in the whole song, one of the best parts in the whole episode. It's just absolutely hilarious. I love it. It it's they say it's the big finale, and it is. It feels like a big blowout musical finale. Like if this was on the West End, the end of this song would have like a standing ovation before you get to the conclusion. It's that good. And I'm not even a huge fan of musicals. Like I've I've listened to some. Um I've watched some, but it's very rare that I find myself not enjoying. Like I do enjoy musicals, I just haven't seen a lot of them, and there are some that really annoy me. Like Moulin Rouge, I'm not a fan of because I really hate the soundtrack for it. Because it's a mess. Like the way all those modern songs are just cut up and mixed together really winds me up. I don't know why. There's just something about Moulin Rouge that I really do not like. But this is good. This is really good. Um, so yeah, and the songs are worth listening to. So yeah, that's all I'm going to say regarding the episode, because obviously I've already said a lot, and like I said, this is the episode where a lot of these ongoing plot threads really kind of come to a head. So I'm trying not to spoil too much of that because I want people to go and watch this episode. So, well, to watch this season, really. But yeah, I think if the those old scientists is like my favorite episode of this series, then Subspace Rhapsody comes a very, very close second. And yeah, it's just phenomenal. It's one of the best episodes I think of modern Star Trek. Um, and then the finale, and I do not want to speak too much about this because it's phenomenal. The finale, Hegemony, features the Gorn, brings the Gorn back, creates a threat, creates an ongoing action spectacle, brings back um, a lot of characters that maybe we haven't seen for a while. Well, actually, no, that's not quite right. Brings back a lot of the recurring casts. So, like, Captain Patel returns, Sam returns, Robert April's in this one as well. Pelly is in this one. Like, this is kind of an all hands on deck one. And there is a very surprising addition in this episode. I'm not going to say who it is because I don't want to spoil it, because I didn't know it was happening. I didn't know this character was going to appear, and then they did, and I bloody loved it. Like the actor they've got playing this character, I don't know who they are. I've not seen them in anything ever before, but they do a brilliant job as this character. So it's a character you will know from the moment they appear, but I'm not going to spoil who it is because it's that good. The only thing I have that I could possibly level as a complaint against this episode, because this episode is great, like easily one of the best of the season. It's just non-stop action. There's one complaint that I can make, which is kind of like a plot element, which actually kind of irks me a bit. But the biggest thing I could say against it is that it's a cliffhanger. This episode takes the classic the thing Star Trek Next Generation did for years, and then obviously Voyager did a couple of times as well, where the end of the season is this big action spectacle building up this amazing story, only for it to end on a cliffhanger, like a very good cliffhanger, but a cliffhanger that leaves you agonized and waiting for the next installment. And the first time Star Trek did this, they did it with The Best of Both Worlds. And this has almost that exact same energy. Like, because The Best of Both Worlds from Star Trek The Next Generation, where Picard gets assimilated by the Borg, absolutely fantastic episode. The ending is incredibly dramatic. It's like perfectly riveting. And it's raised the stakes so high for the second installment. And then it ends on a cliffhanger. And you don't know where it's going to go. And that's exactly the same here. Now, obviously, because this is a prequel to the original series, we know some characters that are, going to survive. But there is a lot up in the air about a lot of the other characters, and there's a lot of things that can change and impact. And there's a lot of things that can happen to the story that could even happen to the characters that aren't necessarily a death. Like, there's a character in Deep Space Nine who has an artificial limb, but you wouldn't know unless you'd seen those episodes where it's mentioned and relevant. So that could easily be the case here, and it's so annoying to be able to be forced to wait because of the strikes, and I completely get the strikes, but this just shows that writers and actors deserve what they're asking for, because I wouldn't care this much if the writing and the acting wasn't as good as it is. That's the whole reason why cliffhangers like this make you care. And I really care, and I'm really looking forward to it. Like, this episode, great on its own, but the setup that it puts in, if they stick the landing, and I am more than confident that they will, just because of the caliber of writing that is in this series, I am more than satisfied that they will stick the landing. This has the potential to be one of the best 2-part episodes of Star Trek ever. So, yeah, fingers crossed, because this could be incredible. So yeah, that's as spoiler-free as I can get. My thoughts of Star Trek Strange New Worlds. I absolutely love this. I really hope it gets more episodes soon. If not with the next season, then hopefully with season 4, and is allowed to really stretch its legs. Like, I think I've made it pretty clear this is my favourite modern Star Trek show. If it continues with the way it is going, this has the potential to quite possibly become one of, if not my ultimate favourite Star Trek show. And I have an episode where I'm going to be talking about my favourite Star Trek show, and there is a very good reason why that one is my absolute favourite. But Strange New Worlds is getting there. Like, I really care about these characters, I care about the concepts, I'm really enjoying it. And my own general distaste for prequels isn't really playing a factor. Like, in fact, the worst part about this being a prequel is that the original series doesn't seem like a worthy successor to it, because it's nowhere near as good. I know that's kind of sacrilege to say in some Star Trek circles, that I'm not a huge fan of the original series, and I don't think the original series is as good of a follow-up as it will inevitably be to this. Because in terms of the timeline, Strange New Worlds comes first, then the original series, then the original movies. I love the original movies. They were my introduction to Star Trek. And then from there I went on to watch things like Star Trek The Next Generation. But this is just phenomenal. It's on another level in terms of just how good it is, and I'm really enjoying it. And I'm so glad that, you know, these episodes exist. You know, so it's got not only probably the best first season of Star Trek, it's quite possibly got one of the best second seasons of Star Trek ever. Thing is, when it goes to the third and fourth, it's got some very stiff competition, because season 3 of Next Generation was fantastic, and season 4 of Deep Space Nine is pretty much perfect. So we'll see how good it can get. But yeah, hopefully you've enjoyed this episode. If you have watched Strange New Worlds, I would love to hear what you think about it, who your favourite character is, how you think Captain Pike gets his hair quite so high. I'd love to know. In the meantime, you all look after yourselves, take the very best care of yourselves as best as you can. You know, we're heading towards, you know, winter and Christmas now, so a lot of people are getting the seasonal affective things kicking in. So, you know, just look after yourselves and do whatever you can to enjoy yourself and take time for yourself amongst everything else that you have to do. Until next time, my friends, you all look after yourselves. Bye.
Thank you, my friends, for once again joining me on Garhdo Goes Geek. Your continued support for this podcast means the absolute world to me, and I am grateful for every single one of you who stays and listens to one of my episodes. It means the absolute world. Now, if you would like to engage more with me or the podcast, we have a Discord community, small but growing, and we now have commissions open on Ko-Fi. So if there's a topic you would like to see me cover, you can pay me to cover it. All funds will be used for legal purchase of the relevant items where I do not have them. Have a look on the link tree for more information. Until next time, look after yourselves.